Aloha, beautiful beings, and welcome to another episode of the Yoni Havana podcast, where we explore consciousness, looking into how things work in the universe so we can enjoy life more and become more whole. My guest today is one of the founding fathers of biohacking, founder of PrimalHacker, and neo-shamanic student and teacher, Thaddeus Owen. In this episode, Thaddeus talks about his journey from biohacking to neo-shamanism, how a series of mystical experiences led him deep into exploring spirituality, the immense power of intention, and how to use it in the digital age, and much more. If you find value in this conversation, please share it with a friend. So enjoy this deeply mystical and enlightening conversation with Thaddeus Owen. Aho. Thaddeus, thank you for coming on to the show. Welcome.
Yoni, it's good to be here, and it's great to see you.
It's good to see you too. The last time I interviewed you for a podcast was my podcast, The Modern Caveman, along with my co-host then, Matt Carrasco. And this is actually when I met you in person in 2019 at PaleoFX. And both of us were in quite different places then. You're the source for biohacking for a lot of people, especially for me. I was buying a lot of headphones from you and all kinds of gadgets for lighting and EMF. And I'm very grateful for everything that you've taught me. Since then, before then, during that interview, and since then, and what's cool is now in 2023, we have moved quite a bit. And you have been one of my catalysts to move more into spirituality and more into soul work. And what happened during the 2020 shenanigans is that I see you on your PrimalHacker YouTube, and you're holding a notebook, which you tend to do, take notes, and you're great at studying things and teaching them to others. And it was quite a, what do we call this? Really, I'm going to say really weird and transformational time in society for the planet. And you took a stance in saying, here's what I'm reading, and I'm not going to explicitly said everything that you said in that video, but to me, it touched my soul. I'm like, I'm calling bullshit on a lot of what's going on right now. And this guy's already ahead on A, B, C, D, and E. So what happens next is I see that you have, I don't know if it was like a month after or how long after, but I see that you have a retreat going on. And it started as Fire and Ice, if I'm not mistaken. And then it was called Spirit of Nature. It was about getting, to me, what I was reading was we're gonna do some cold exposure, we're gonna do some sauna, and there's gonna be some shamanic teachings, which I didn't know much about shamanic teachings. I knew a little bit. I did go to Peru and participate in shamanic ceremonies before, but I mean my knowledge was limited. And I was telling Matt, my co-host, when we interviewed you, and still a good friend of mine, Thaddeus knows a good amount of stuff on what's going on. He's on track. I'm going to have a good amount of time and physically and connect with the community, but I'm also going, the main things were I'm going to learn from people that I feel called to learn from and learn with and connect with them to grow from this point on. Because the amount of, I'm going to say, ignorance and fear that was going on in the world was immense. And I was like, wow, this has to happen. So I want to give you a big thank you for being brave, and being brave not only to make a stance, but being brave to look into what's going on in the world, how things work, and doing this. You've been doing this work for a long time. It started with healing people with light and a lot of other things. And yeah, I mean, just wanted to give you kudos as we dive into this conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Yoni. And last time in 2019, we were standing outside in Austin, Texas, barefoot with no shirts on. We've got fully clothed today, and we're indoors but still standing. And I went from this brand, PrimalHacker, that I created and co-founded and was really, really popular on social media and had tens of thousands of followers and on stages all across the country. And I kind of like shot myself in the foot when I started talking about spirituality, because a lot of the biohackers at the time were not ready for that. And so I lost a huge amount of my audience by talking about what I saw was the truth that was going on in 2020, and also talking about spirituality. So I kind of like crashed and burned my brand, and I've like the phoenix rising up from the ashes. I'm kind of being called to do something totally new at this moment. in relation to connecting in with our true selves, the earth, and spirituality in a way that I never thought I would be doing.
That's cool. How did you feel about it at the time when you felt like you were shooting yourself in the foot, while still being committed to sharing this information and giving your piece?
Yeah, I thought that I wasn't hearing people question the narrative in our space. And me, I had a lot of influence and a lot of people listening. And to be quiet about my truth of what I saw happening in the world and all the fear, and trying to help people understand that coming out of fear and creating our reality, like this is how the reality works. Like we create our reality from our thoughts. And if we're constantly thinking of fearful things, that's what we're going to manifest. And I just felt called to start talking about what was going on and then how to move ourselves from fear into a place where we're creating a reality we want to live in. And so at the time, I didn't know I was shooting myself in the foot. I thought people would be very receptive to the message. And I was muted off of Facebook by talking about things they didn't like. And a lot of my audience they didn't want to hear about spirituality. And I was told in person, even as late as last month, that they stopped following me after I started talking about spirituality. So
as of last month, I mean, we're in 2023 right now. Were the people that told you that, did they come back or no?
So the person that told me that signed up for a retreat at the Florida Pyramids, said they didn't care anything about spirituality and stopped following me as I talked about that. And then they proceeded to hire me to coach and mentor them for the next 6 months.
Nice. So how do you feel about that path right now?
So I am on the path that I'm on, and I didn't choose the path. And at first I thought, oh, I'm going to be really popular. Like I'm feeding my ego, because I'm telling everyone like my truth of what's happening. And I thought people they'd resonate with my message and it would lead to more popularity. Like I was really popular on social media and my ego was starting to feed off of those things. And I liked, thousands of views and people reaching out to me every day for podcasts or questions or to send me free stuff in the mail. Like literally every week I would get free stuff. And so I thought like it would be the same path. And what I found is the further I went down that path, the more polarizing I was becoming to others that weren't ready. And I learned my message was probably not crafted in the way that people could resonate with. And so I thought, well, maybe I should just go back to teaching about light and science and nutrition and movement through an ancestral pathway. And every time I tried to go back down that path, I would be pulled into these experiences that told me, no, there's another path for me and I have to follow it regardless of what I or my ego wants to do. So what ultimately has happened is I did some work at the last pyramid retreat a year ago. There was a lady there who studied Kabbalah and Jewish Hermeticism and mysticism, as well as Christian mysticism. And she did some numerology stuff for me and gave me a book on numerology. And my numerology book for my birth, place in this cosmos says that I am supposed to be pursuing a spiritual path during my time in this incarnation. But my ego is going to want to pursue and be really good at pursuing financial and corporate paths. So
Wow.
every time,
Oh
every time I try to go in a direction, I'm being called into the spiritual path, especially since 2019. And it just keeps happening. And I'm working on following that muse.
Wow. That sounds like your life story, which is cool. And it's cool that you're listening more to your authentic self. I'm going to call this the authentic self, but the higher self, rather than the egoic identity that wants to feed on attention, right? At the end of the day, that's attention and validation. So that's really cool. What were some, if you may share, what were some of the experiences that gave you those nudges towards this path?
So I've had at least 5 experiences that blew my mind in the last 3 years. So what catalyzed this is in 2019, through PrimalHacker getting bigger, I decided I'm spending so much time learning science and being out in the world and I'm not reconnecting with myself or my spirit. And I'm getting older, and that's something I want to do, and I've always thought I would do. So I decided in August of 2019 that this would be the winter. As soon as winter hit, I was going to go inside. I was going to read a lot of spirituality books, meditate, and do all this spiritual work. And that was August 2019. So the winter of 2020 hits and the world shuts down. And that was my year to go deep into spirituality. So number one, that coincidence or synchronicity opened me even further by just awakening the fire and the passion inside of myself to go deeper than I ever would have done if 2020 had never happened. So number one, I went down that path and just started consuming and studying and seeing what resonated. In that same year in 2020, I got married. And during our honeymoon, we took a trip to Sedona, Arizona. I've never been there. And we wanted to investigate the vortexes. So I got this book from 1980s called Sacred Sites. And there's all sacred sites in the US that they claim people didn't want to tell anyone about, and they're really secret, and they don't want them trampled and used inappropriately. So I looked at all the sacred sites in Arizona. And of course, they list these vortexes in Sedona. So I'm thinking, let's go do some meditations and hang out at the vortexes and see, like, let's see if there's anything there. Like, I've had no spiritual experience as an adult, and I've not been to these vortexes, but I had been engaged in meditation for many years. So we drive from Wisconsin to Sedona, Arizona over 2 days in a car with our new puppy and my new wife. And I get sciatica pain in my back. I've never had it before, but this long trip, whatever, I can't walk. I'm limping. I can barely make it. And we're supposed to be hiking to this vortex in the desert. And I don't know that I can make it 10 feet. So I hobble along barefoot. So we're barefoot standing on the earth, and we're hobbling along, and people are like remarking that we're barefoot and how we can do that. And I just wanted to connect to the earth and really experience this vortex. But I was really in pain, excruciating pain. And this is day 2 of the pain. And we get to the top of the kind of this boulder field, and we're sitting on this giant rock, like it's maybe 30, 40 feet tall. And my wife, Heidi, says, let's just sit down and do a guided meditation. And she plays a guided meditation on her phone. So I sit and I'm just laying against the rock, and I'm listening to this guided meditation. And within 3 minutes, I'm no longer hearing the meditation. Like, I felt myself in my mind get sucked into the rock underneath into the vortex. And these beings with these gray cloaks, I can't see their faces, they're talking to me. And I'm like, I'm imagining this, I'm daydreaming, but I'm going to go with it. Like, why not? And they tell me all about the vortexes and why they're in Arizona, in Sedona. And they tell me about these underground cities. They gave me their name. They called themselves the Rock People. And then they showed me this energy ball, and it was huge. Like, it was in a tunnel. It was like 8 feet tall. It was a big ball of like spinning energy. It was glowing. And they're like, if you touch this, you'll be healed of your pain. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, of course I'm going to touch it. And so I'm like, okay, I put my hand on it. And then they're like, okay, you're going to tell people about this experience. And so I go back up into my body, or just like out of my imagination, I stop daydreaming, and the meditation is over. And Heidi asks me, like, well, how did you like the meditation? And I told her I didn't hear any of it. And she got all upset. Like, what do you mean? We just did this great meditation and she had this amazing experience. And I'm like, well, I had this weird daydream or whatever. And I stood up and I walked a few steps and I had zero pain. Like, the excruciating pain I was in was 100% gone. And over the course of the 10-day trip, it never came back. It was a spontaneous healing. And I've heard about people having those things. I've never experienced that. And so long story short, on the way back, we stop in Vail. We hike barefoot in the Rocky Mountains. We stop on a boulder. We meditate. I get sucked back down into this like vortex in Vail, and the rock people are telling me like I need to tell other people about them. And I'm like, this is my imagination. It's crazy. So I'll ask you people, like, on the way down from this hike, which is a popular hike, people are walking up and down. They're passing us on the rock with their dogs. And I had walked up the whole hike. I was looking at the ground because I enjoy looking for cool rocks. Like, I like collecting cool rocks. And they're like, okay, tell people and teach them about the rock people. I'm like, I don't know anything about the rock people. Like, I don't even know that you're real, or like, I've never even heard that name. It's not like I read about the rock people. It's like, I've never heard this name. And so then I'm like, well, if you want me to do this, then on the way back down the hike to my car, I want a silver coin. Like, give me a silver coin. Like, and then I'll know, like, you produced it. It wasn't there before. People are walking up and down. They would have seen it. So, like, if I get that, that's the sign. So we walk back down the hike. We're like 50 feet from the car. I'm looking everywhere. I see no silver coin. I was like, all right, screw it. Like, it's not going to happen. So it's just my imagination. And right before we leave the trailhead to get to the parking lot, there's a silver coin in the sand of the hiking trail, not buried. And it wasn't like a dime or a quarter. It was a silver pendant that had an eye and a pyramid on it. And I picked this up, and Heidi was, I told her the story on the way down. So she's looking too. And she saw that when I picked it up, and she like freaked out.
Holy shit.
I don't know, like those experiences to me, those were my experiences that said there's something here. And then I keep getting these calls from experiences like that have never happened to me before.
I mean, holy shit, one. And that's, I know from other stories that you've told me, and just by knowing you and what it sounds like, it's your third eye energy. The chakra there is very developed. I have to say, a part of me is like, oh shit, I'm jealous, like, this is amazing. I've been doing a lot of work, as you know, with medicine and not medicine and meditating and Dr. Joe, and it's one of your gifts. So, really enjoy it. And please, if you may, bask us with more of these mystical experiences that we had, stories. I'd love to hear them.
I do have more. And I encourage you, Yoni, to keep going, and everyone else, because I've been thinking about this for a long time, of like, everyone keeps telling me about these psychedelic experiences with ayahuasca, and you have these opening and awakening experiences with, 5-MeO DMT, psilocybin. And I've never had experiences with those substances. Psilocybin like twice. And I just walked around in the mountains years ago. I didn't know what I was doing. So never intentionally using those. But as I was like, so I'll tell you two more experiences that happened to me just like 3 weeks ago. But as I'm thinking over the last week in my head of like hearing these stories from Aubrey Marcus's podcast about psychedelic experiences, and I'm like, it's weird because I've never had one of those awakening experiences through psychedelics, but I feel like I'm tuned into other people's experiences that have had them. And then I had this thought about the 100th monkey theory, where like these monkeys on an island, totally like isolated from anything else, they figure out how to use a specific tool. And once 100 monkeys learn this tool on this island, suddenly the monkeys on all these other islands all over the world know, and they have the information about how to use that tool without the monkeys physically traveling to any other island. So then I'm like, well, is there the 100th monkey with psychedelics, where all these people suddenly are awakening to these psychedelic intentional experiences to relive and witness trauma, to erase that trauma from their energy field, and to awaken their third eye, or their first eye, the pineal? And am I like one of the 100th monkeys, where like, once enough of you keep doing this work, like, I'm benefiting from the work you're doing that I'm not participating in physically, but I'm participating in the field. So I would say like, all the work you're doing is absolutely changing the field, even if you aren't seeing it. And when you say like, my third eye is open, I don't necessarily agree. I think everyone's third eye is open, but I think not everyone is ready to see what's being rendered by that first eye. So your pineal is receiving all the information that's all around us, and it's more than we see with our physical eyes. But it won't render that information visible until we're ready, and we're ready to see more. And so for whatever reason, my awakening happened in 2020, when I had been like studying all this stuff about what was happening in the world. And suddenly it just like the veil was ripped open, and I was like, holy shit, what is happening? And I think that that experience, that traumatic experience, allowed me to be able to hold more in what I can see. And that's the work you're doing as well. So the next experience, I'm at the pyramids in Florida, our retreat, and we're hosting. So we're providing meditations, guided meditations, shamanic breath work, Kundalini yoga, Qigong for the community that comes to train and mentor and learn with us. So Washayla, the galactic shaman, and she's been on your podcast, she was giving a guided meditation with the Alki One ball. And I was participating in it because she was leading that session. And so I just went into this guided meditation. And again, I got pulled out. Like, I don't know what the guided meditation was about. I suddenly found myself under the pyramids. And I don't know if they were the pyramids in Egypt, but that was the information I felt like I was being given. It's like, I was under the pyramids. I was laying flat on my stomach on a stone slab, deep underground under the pyramids. And I didn't want to be like, it's just right, your imagination, but imagination is reality. There's no difference is what we're learning. So I'm on face down on the stone slab and I want to turn over and look around and just see in my imagination, like what's around me? Like what is happening? And all these beings forcefully grab me and forced me to stay flat on my face on the stone slab. And they start working this energy medicine on me, like healing me. And they told me that my energetic field had been cleared enough that they would initiate me. And these were the rock people again. And like, we're going to initiate you now. And initiation or initiate just means you're ready to start the journey. Not that you're some master, but you're ready to begin like from the bottom. So they're like, you're ready to be initiated. And they pulled me into this vortex, like a black hole in the ground that went deep into the earth. And I'm falling through this vortex. And all I see around me is the entire black vortex suddenly becomes geometry. And all I'm seeing is geometry everywhere. Everything's made up of geometry. And so I get to the bottom of the vortex and I open my eyes. The meditation is over. Washayla asks everyone about their experience. No one says anything. So I was like, well, I'll tell you what happened. Like, it's pretty weird. And as soon as I said that, one of the other participants, she said, she like turned super like white. And she's like, I had this experience during this meditation that I was wearing like a cloak and I was healing somebody under the pyramids. Oh. I was like, my mind was like blown. I was like, are you kidding me? And she started crying. Wow. Like it was bizarre. And there was another experience the next day in a different guided meditation where I got this upload, like this information started flooding into my body. And it just told me like, there's this new form of shamanism called neo-shamanism. And you need to start bringing this into the world. And it happened over like 10 minutes. And for the next 2 hours, we were sitting at a really long table outdoors. Everyone just looked at me and stared at me. And I was just like sweating and I was writing. And I just couldn't stop writing all this information that had come into my field. And I still have the piece of paper and it's in color and there's all these ideas. And Washayla was looking at it and she's like, oh my God, we need to do this. And then the person sitting next to me was like, did you just get some download about the new earth? And I was like, yes. And so I'm not a shaman, but that's the information of like, you need to birth this neo-shamanism, which has to do with older shamanism, has to do with the earth and denser things, clearing the energy field. And so like, that's all valid. But I think a lot of the older shamans are afraid to go into the metaverse or digital currency or the internet. And those are the places we need to start anchoring intention, positive intention for ascension, where we need to start anchoring light and bringing more light. And I kind of feel like there needs to be a way to train neo-shamans to work in the new spaces we're creating.
Wow. Absolutely wow. Everything rings so true to me that's you're being activated, initiated to do this work. Makes a lot of sense to me knowing you. And it's amazing. I mean, it's amazing that you're capable. I know that's what was giving you the kudos, capable to dropping into these states. I think it's not that I don't have any visions, but I'm saying your third eye and a bunch of your capabilities and being tuned to the field and being able to hold a certain amount of light and experience, I think, in lifetimes is so immense that this is why the higher beings come and say like, all right, you're ready to do this work. You're on a mission, and I think what seems like is that you're being better at putting your ego aside and not satisfying the egoic identity that was also it was a part of to get to this initiation, but like putting this aside. So like, what is the real mission? And by that, you had to shoot yourself in the foot and let go of a few things and some pleasures, let's say, and status and love that you were receiving from a bunch of people, whether they were strangers or not. I mean, you were receiving love in the form of free things and gratitude and people asking questions and asking for your wisdom and teaching. So that's, I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. This is why when you wrote to me neo shamanism, I'm like, I don't know what that means. And now, I mean, I want to hear more about that. Before I do, I want to touch on something actually that happened to me last night. So on my end, I've been slowly developing my third eye, and I've been doing a practice of lucid dreaming. So I went to sleep at 9, woke up at 4, took me a little while to fall asleep. And I know once I fall asleep, though, around 4 or like 3:34, then I'm going to get into lucid dreaming because I'm not that tired. I'm not going to be into deep sleep anymore. And I keep a little awareness into like, okay, I'm going to sleep, and I get into this mode. I don't know if I'm in theta, I don't know if I'm in delta, but anyways, for the very first time, I felt like I had a communication, from like a real communication with sounds and some real very clear vision. Because sometimes I'm lucid in a dream, so I'm in a dream and I'm taking control, like I'm flying, I'm doing different things, I'm looking around, I'm amazed at the beauty of the place that I'm in, where my consciousness has traveled. This time I had a communication, and I was so frightened by that communication. It came with a sound that was so different. And like I saw some letters and such, and like some sort of language coming in, and I felt my heart, because I had some awareness of my body too. I felt like the area of my heart and chest like really getting to fight or flight, because I was like, holy fuck, what is going on in here? I was so scared. They stopped the communication immediately. They saw that I'm not ready. I was not ready to be communicated in this way. I'm getting there, but I was not ready to get communicated in this way at that place. So the message that I sent is, please communicate me again in a more gentle way, in a different state. This is why it was giving me the credit. I'm getting there, but also there's fear. As exactly as you said, it's so foreign to this filtered living that I have, that it ignited fear in me. So, and I'm open in this state. I'm super open. As soon as it comes, I'm like, holy fuck, So
it's this is, I think, part of all of our challenge. Like, I was trained as an engineer, and I've worked in corporate America as an engineer and research scientist for decades. So the way that we're trained is to ignore or be fearful of these weird experiences, and that they're not real, because science can't explain them. So therefore they must not be true or real. And part of our work as we enter this new age is to listen. And when you just asked, from the dream state, coming out of it, to receive the information in a different, more gentle way, that different way might not be in a dream. And so your challenge now is to listen to where that's going to show up in your life, that message that they are trying to give you, because it might not be in a lucid dream. It might be now in a different way. But if we're not paying attention and listening, because we've been trained our entire lives through the forced schooling system, through technology and science, and the masculine version of how we do things, rather than the feminine version of listening, receiving, and going within. And a lot of the feminine is like, you go in the dark cave and you face your fears, and you come out with information you didn't have before. That's hard for us as a culture and as men to do. And there's no training really to do those things. And your experience, I had the opposite experience to lucid dream when I was younger. So when I was a little kid, I had a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety when I was younger, and like between 7 and 10 years old. And when I used to dream, I would dream night after night after night that somebody was stabbing me and killing me with a knife all the time. And it got to be so bad. Like, I was so afraid in my dream that I would become lucid and wake myself up in my dream and say like, oh, finally I can do something. Like, I can produce a knife in my dream. I can manifest a different reality. And what I ended up doing is when I became lucid, I could either create tools to fight back, or what I started to figure out is I could completely change the dream landscape. I mean, the first things I did is wake myself up. So I'd be lucid. I'm like, oh my God, it's a dream. Someone's trying to kill me. Wake myself up. I'd wake up. Then I started having tools to fight back. And then finally, I thought, I can just change my reality. It's a dream. So I just erased the reality, the world, and recreated something pleasant when I was lucid. And that's something that takes time and practice. So as you're practicing with like lucidity and lucid dreaming, the key is like being aware enough in the dream state to create the conditions for which you can learn in the best way and get that information. And it's hard to do. Like, I don't lucid dream anymore. It's very rare for me to do that. So for you to be able to do that that's so phenomenal. Like, you can get so much information there.
It's a lot of fun. And I think, as you said, it's a world with creation, with the more imagination comes in, there's more freedom in that imagination there. And for whatever reason, as I'm developing my skills in lucid dreaming, it's kind of been thrown, kind of like you were in those experiences. I've been thrown into another world. It's just my consciousness all of a sudden is in a different place. This is also how I know that I'm dreaming, because it looks so different. And I took a 1-day intensive course on lucid dreaming from a shaman that I work with in Peru, this British guy, and he gave some tools. So I have certain positions that I would lay in, and I make a mental note, and some exercises that I was doing during the day, as simple as like taking just my hand and going through the other hand. So just do this multiple times during the day, and then if it goes through, you're dreaming. So this is how I started, and then there was a journaling aspect of that, and all that. So you had those lucid dreams experiences already as early as that is 7 or 10 years old. That is in alignment with the teacher that I hired, Dr. Aubrey Degnan, whom your wife got her book Luminous, an Enlightened Being, and she at a very young age would have these experiences of seeing leprechauns and all kinds of beings, and I think what I'm getting, the information that I'm getting, is that usually when children have these experiences at a young age, they're old souls that have already reached very high states of light, whether that's enlightenment and beyond, or around then, before, and that's when they come in, they already have this awareness. It doesn't leave the soul. But then, as you're saying, with society and the egoic identity that wants a status and approval from father and whatnot, then a lot of people suppress those skills and gifts and put them to sleep, because that's all fairy tale bullshit, which I used to think until a few years ago. Thought it was all bullshit. When my wife,
me too,
when my wife and I met, she said, we're soulmates. I'm like, this is all BS. Like, what's the point of this? Like, this is a YOLO. You're done. You die, you're done. This is the body. You are the body, and this is it. And I was in that thought. A good friend of mine, when we were 13, whom from a big family in the state of Israel, convinced me really very logically that there's no God. And I was an atheist for years. And also I came from a family of Holocaust survivors and other people that perished in the Holocaust. I'm like, if there's a God, why would that be? Now I know this is all God. It's the derivatives of God playing games with itself for the sake of experience. So whether they're being abused or they're abusing, it's all for the sake of experience. And that's what I'm seeing now. Recently, on the last retreat, the men's retreat that I hosted, actually on a very low dose that I usually just hold space for others, there were some savages in there, and I was able to drop in and surrender. And I had one of the hardest days of my life, where I had experiences of the rib injury that I have for over 3 years now, that really I spoke to the body, is what Shayla teaches, like speak to the body, ask the body. And I kept asking my body over the past few years, but in that state, when I'm on medicine, I'm able to get answers way more vividly and way more directly. So I was thrown into visions of the Holocaust as a kid, and I don't know if it's my past life. I don't know if it's generational or just somebody else in the family. I could tell this is my ancestral. It's in the DNA. But it was the terror of a kid within a Holocaust camp, and there was like a kid sitting on the toilet in front of everybody taking a shit, and the terror that I felt. So I felt that terror while there in California, and I'm fearful for my life, from that experience. Just that vibration is with me. The bottom of the map of consciousness, it's beyond guilt and shame. It's beyond fear of fear. It's just like absolute terror for about 2 hours. I feel that. And I'm ready to go home. I'm hosting this retreat, but I'm ready to go home. And I'm thinking like, but wait, am I even safe home? I don't feel safe at home. I'm not safe anywhere. And, you know, I work through this with my tools that I have. And I also know like I'm experiencing something that is generational trauma, and I'm happy I'm doing this. I'm doing this for everybody. I feel initiated and chosen to work through this for the lineage and the world at large. And then there was another Yoni at that retreat who was born in the United States. And we share this Holocaust, not only visions and ancestral trauma. You know, what was nice is we got to share and work through the pain together. And it felt much better to work through generational trauma with someone and have somebody on the team, not deflect it as I've done in the past, deflect sadness, deflect lower vibrations. I was very good at keeping a high vibration. It's a huge smile on my face, and never also get sick. I have a sinus infection that's going on now for about 3 months since the Florida mastermind. It started then. It was an infection then, but I developed an infection, and I swung the pendulum a bit much, perhaps in feeling feelings and letting them be and sustaining them. It's been interesting. So I'm sharing these stories for people that see that if you don't have perhaps those skills and gifts developed at a young age or in a later age of being able to be in a meditation or on a mountain, sometimes it helps to have medicine. Medicine is these plants are teachers. That's what it is. They're teachers, they're initiators, and some people are called to do work with them. Some people, they don't even have any sort of desire or need to, because, you know, they're just getting into meditation. 3 minutes later, they're already in a place. And so what's the point? There's no need to use the tool if somebody already has the access. So
yeah, I think these plants, they're tools. Like every one of us, and you made a comment about like older souls experience this. And I don't believe that any soul is older, because if we all imagine that the creator, creatrix, man, woman, both, that created the realm, gave a piece of their self for everything that's here, the rocks, the trees, us. We are those pieces. And so we're all the same age, but our ascension, our spiritual journey, we're all, in quoting Fortune Saint Germain, we're all ascending masters, but we all ascend and learn at different rates. Just like in school, just like in life, we don't do things at the same pace. So everybody here is learning and ascending, and just not everyone is ready to take some of the next steps in this lifetime or in this year, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And we've been given this bounty of the earth and these energetics to tap us into the field all around us. And those plant teachers are in every country of the world as different plant teachers to help us connect. And so I love like that people are using them, because I think I even benefit from, like I told you with the 100th monkey theory, that I do feel like I'm benefiting from everyone else going through those experiences. And some days I feel called to, I should totally do a plant experience. And other days I think like I'm kind of afraid. So I think I have some fear and resistance around that as well. But those teachers allow you to open into worlds that you might find harder to access, you know, using just pure meditation. So I love that you're doing that and that you provide those experiences for people. And I think they're super powerful, and they change people's entire lives after that experience.
And I think you're right on with the field as a general. As people are doing more work and more people are ascending and doing the work, then there's higher, the earth itself is tuned to a higher vibration. And then,
well, what I wanted to say is, like, as you were talking and you're talking about ancestral trauma, like I never used to believe in any of that stuff. And now I'm like, oh my God, it's true. Like we have this DNA, this codex, this like code of information that's been riding with our mother's mother from like really far back. And we know that like DNA is not just a physical biochemical thing. It holds energy and information from past generations. And if I look at like my parents and other people's parents that I know that are in their like 60s to 80s, that generation didn't do a whole lot of self-development and spiritual work for the most part. And more of us in this generation, like today, are being called to do the work. So I think what you're doing, Yoni, and what a lot of us are working through is like, we have to work through this ancestral trauma and these energetics that are encoded in our bodies. So even the next generation, my kids, your kids, don't have to repeat these patterns and do that. They can start from a higher level of work than what we're doing. So this clearing of old traumas, I think, is what helps us accelerate our own journey and then the journey of those that come after us. So I love that you're doing that work.
Thank you. And I totally agree. And what I've seen with my parents and that generation and boomers, is I think, since their parents went through such hard times, especially when we're talking about people that were there in the World War I and II, it was too painful to even think about doing work then. Like their parents, so my grandparents didn't have the capacity to hold the space for them to do generational trauma healing. There's survival mode, and let's just be happy with what we have. Just holding the frame of stability was enough. And then I was provided with nurturing enough that I knew that the world is safe and beautiful, and this is all gravy. And then when I grew up and kept growing, I'm like, but oh man, like I've been ignoring the ugly parts of it that are within me, that are within the family. And I feel equipped because the world is safe and beautiful. And I feel equipped to go into these dark places, knowing that I can come back to my higher vibrations by, healing those aspects and letting them express themselves. Because the DNA and all these energies, they exist. I was talking to your wife. The energy doesn't really stand still at any point. It's contracting or expanding. It wants to be moving. And sometimes when there's a contraction, there's a want for there's a desire for it to flow out, but there's fear for that to flow out. And actually, when I think about you, and there's some other people that I know that are very developed in a spiritual sense, and there is sometimes a fear of with the teachers, and sometimes there's a calling. They know that once people like you do engage with the teachers in a high level, like it's okay, the rocket is on. And what's fearful is the egoic identity, because it wants to hold on to something. It wants to hold on to some sort of stability and some sort of, I'm going to say status, but even status as a father. Status, it's like there's a fear of like, is this really going to be completely dissolved? For a few hours, there's a good chance it would be. And it's going to change quite a bit, because what's the fear is only coming from egoic identity. The higher self is not afraid of anything. That's what I've seen, and I get it. And I've had conversations with people that have done some medicine journeys, and they tell me, ayahuasca is calling me, but I know that once that happens, like I want to be ready. I want to do much more work first to be ready for it, because I'm going to be initiated and activated to a really strong extent. I get it. I mean, I've done ayahuasca one retreat 5 years ago. I don't feel called to do it anytime soon. That's just the way it is. I'm pretty happy with the steady growth, and also when I've done a reading on my energy type and my mission, it is not about chaotic expansion. It's about gradual expansion, and that's the path that I've been on. Is the path that I'm called to help others experience.
Can you tell me about where did you learn that? Like that, how did you identify your energetic blueprint, let's say?
So I was introduced to something called human design. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it, but I do not know much about it.
Yeah, so I've heard of it from an American guy, was very much in the left brain. Actually, he was a very successful startup guy. TED Talk was very successful. You're another TED, what do we call it? Presenter? Alumni. Very much fits the criteria of the left brain Western society. So he somehow was called to go to Peru, and he was the apprentice to the shaman in Peru. And when he was going through his journey, he's back actually in the States doing some more left brain things, but he really studied a ton of Qigong and a ton of Eastern practices and Taoism and a lot of things that you're interested in. There's a lot of similarities in there, because I think the ability to learn that you both have and harness during the left brain is then being utilized in learning the Eastern philosophies. And then, once there's a surrender and such, it's on steroids, learning ancestral wisdom and being connected. So he was the apprentice to the shaman, and he was offering human design. He's like, oh, I'm going to offer something called human design. Never heard of it. So it's based, and he barely knows me because he was just the apprentice to the shaman in ceremonies. He doesn't know me. He was in the same room. He doesn't know me besides my first name. So he offers this also during 2020 or so, or 2021. I think, 2020. So not much to do. I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna see what it's about. I don't believe in astrology at the time. I think it's all bull crap. Also, I'm like, at the time, like, okay, I'm open to it, but I like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, I've seen a lot of the astrology things on newspapers back then, and readers on as I'm driving on some road, and like there's a mystical reader and whatnot, and fortune teller, and like I just don't, I don't think there's anything there. I think it's BS. So all he tells me is send me your birthday in terms of date and birth time, and that's it. And then it spits out a report. It's this software that spits out a report based on those parameters, and it's based on the planets, I think, and a bunch of other information. But it spits out this information about my soul's mission, and there's like, I think, over 60 in terms of criteria of the soul's mission, and strengths and weaknesses, and like when I'm not my authentic self, so like things to look out for, which usually comes in frustration and anger to me of some things. So yeah, so he gives me this, is just giving me the report. He doesn't know me, gives me the report, and I'm like, this is exactly how I've been operating and exactly what feels true to me in terms of my life's mission, everything that I've been doing. So it was on point. It's called Human Design. Then I went to Austin a little bit less than a year ago. I'm just conversing with this woman there about Lila Quantum because I'm a huge fan of the technology. Look out for the episode with their CEO coming up soon after Thaddeus' episode. That's Philip from Lila Quantum. And so I see this woman. I tell her about Lila Quantum because they're hosting the event, and I was actually invited by them. And I'm just constantly talking to people about it. And she happens to offer those human design sessions. And I told her I can make you a card because I have their technology and I can copy frequencies and such. I can make you a special card. I sent her a card and she said, oh, I'd love to pay back. I'm like, oh, I'm checking out your services. You offer human design. I just love to hear it again 3 years after. Let's see what you got. So she goes and, a little bit of different interpretations and knowledge on astrology in an hour long, and just keep being on point. This woman does not know me at all. So they gave me, there's a lot of overlap in the information, but also hearing it again and also hearing her perspective on how things go. And she was talking about the 12 zodiac signs and how their houses, and like I just turned 36 a month ago, and like with the importance of starting a new chapter in terms of 12-year cycles. I was operating on 7-year cycles based on what's his name, Rudolf Steiner. So a ton of information came there, and it was just on point. There was something called like a type, and I'm a type 2 and 4. So it's a type that, so it also showed like chakras and information, but the type 2 and 4, I think it was both enjoying to be expressive in the world and to be a storyteller, which is what I'm doing here on the podcast, but also enjoy being a hermit and sitting down with books to read, which is something we share in common, just to study something. So a lot of my mission is to study things, esoteric knowledge and whatnot, and deliver it in a digestible, relevant way. We have some similarities there, and this is something that came. But there's so many more other things. And also with the storytelling, was telling me this is part of my gifts. I need to keep harnessing it. And I had a lot of throat constrictions for years, especially when I started smoking cannabis when I was in this country as a young college student. And then I kept that habit to suppress and to medicate the pain that was my soul pain. A lot of the soul pain that in the DNA that I talked about with ancestral trauma, I was medicating that thing away because I did not enjoy that at all. And I was enjoying some other creativity and intuition and what. But I saw, and all these things came to me as signs like, put that aside, stop your relationship with Mary Jane, work on expression. The podcast is one of your best platforms to do that. And I even think about my accent as I'm talking right now, and I'm watching it, and I'm stuffed, and there's all kinds of judgment and little fears and doubts that come, and I deflect them. Like, it is what it is. What I can deliver right now is what I can deliver. I'm a bit stuffed. This is the accent. If it doesn't resonate, it doesn't resonate, but it's going to resonate with someone. And I think about the example that you said with when you did the spiritual knowledge, and a lot of the audience was not ready for it, but there was some audience that was ready for it, and actually saying later on, like, I'm hiring you so you can help me. And people like me jumping out of their seats, like, I got to fly to Wisconsin right now, and learn directly from Thaddeus. And I think by doing this, perhaps there's losing a good amount of audience, but then really coming into this new path that seems like the rock people have initiated you to go on. And I'm sure, as you said, it's scary, but it's also, it feels right. And correct me if I'm mistaken.
It totally feels scary because like I just made these people up in my mind. That's what I'm thinking, right? And then I find confirmation, like when I talked to Shayla and told her the story, she's like, yeah, I know the rock people. And I'm like, what? And then I'm reading Alberto Villoldo's book, Shaman, Sage, Healer. This is the one I was reading yesterday when I asked this question. And he doesn't call them the rock people, but he mentions the Incas, these shaman Incas that he met in South America, told him about the stone people. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like,
Oh my God.
how is this even real? Like, I totally made it up. I've never read anything about it. And now that's like three places that have confirmed this thing in my mind. And I'm like, it's freaking me out a little bit. And so what I'll offer to you, Yoni, is like, when you're making this podcast and when you're putting it out there, this is kind of the thing I'm feeling called to teach people is, and shamans know this, right? And we know this as we create, but the intention that you put into the podcast and the intention that you give it when you release the digital file to the web for others, that intention is a vibrational resonance that others will pick up on. And that's what you're telling me. You picked up on my resonance, the vibration I was putting out back when I was talking about these things in 2020. And what I want to encourage you to do is like, who cares about, like, I love your accent. And I think like you're a really good storyteller. And whenever I'm around you, like you're really funny. And like, I enjoy the things that you say. And like, I feel like you're way better at that than I am. And I'm like learning from you. And so as we use these digital tools to connect with each other and to create this new reality, our intention is everything. So as long as you're putting that intention that this podcast and that your voice and your stories and the stories of your guests are going to resonate with the right people, then that is your work. Like, you are a seeker. I can feel from your heart, like you're seeking for yourself, and so that you can bring back this information for others and for your kids and for the next generation, and for more people to learn. And so that path, that seeker path, like not everyone is called to do that. And it's a responsibility that you have. And I think putting just that intention of what do you want people to get from this podcast? When you put that into the digital file and send it out, it makes a real ripple in reality, like a real thing that could be measured with the right tools. And people have measured these things in the laboratory. Like, they are creating real physical things. So you're doing exactly what you need to be doing.
So thank you for the compliments. Thank you for the advice. And what I actually been doing, and I learned this from my teachers in the book that your wife got, Luminous by Dr. Aubrey Degnan, is that I started using the power of prayer. And before every episode that I do a little prayer where I'm asking my spirit guides, God and Heaven's team, as she calls it, I have some language around it, to help me stay in flow, empty, and really channel the divine in me to create inspirational and motivational conversation with my guest that is both joyful for us and very joyful and valuable to the audience. So I do this little prayer, I kind of check in, and I do this, and it actually works every time. And I'm gonna keep doing this when I upload the episodes and share them, and every step along the way. I want to continue this intention and vibration inside. And thank you for that. So that's going to magnify the impact, ignoring obviously the judgment and everything else.
Definitely. And I almost think like, I'm thinking about like, I'm no like super experienced like shaman. I'm kind of like, instead of going through formal training, I kind of feel like shamans of the past, like the Buddha wasn't a Buddhist, Jesus wasn't a Christian. Like these mysticists, these people of the past, like they learned this information. It was given to them. And so when I think about ceremony, like you sit in ceremony as a group, and there's more power as a group when you're all intentionally focused on one thing. So when you think about your podcast, or when anyone listening to this is thinking about what they're trying to create or put out in the world, like, could you gather a group of friends and sit in ceremony? And it could even be like as little as 10 minutes. Like, these things work on the quantum level. So a tiny dose makes a huge difference. Like, could you sit and open a ceremony where 5 of us put our intention into your podcast, that it benefit others, that it open up new realms of possibility, and, you know, all these things that you want those intentions to be? Could you open a space with a group of people to anchor those intentions into that digital space? So when someone listens to that podcast or all the podcasts that you're putting out, those frequencies and vibrations start activating people. And I think that's kind of like the information I'm being given, is like, how do we begin anchoring these things, both personally and as a group, through ceremony into this digital space, so that the digital world, which could be used to control, like, you can only see this, we're only going to give you this information, we're going to get you to feel this way, these vibrations give you a hypnotic state so we can reprogram you. Rather than that, can we begin programming and activating people to think for themselves and to awaken to their new world? That's kind of the way I feel like I'm being called, is to create some of those ideas. I've never heard that before, but I'm like, I see people doing ceremonies to heal others and ceremonies to like put crystals in the earth to anchor frequencies for this part of the earth. But what about in the digital space that we're all using now?
That's a fantastic idea. And what actually is going to happen as you're talking about it, I'm going to ask you, your wife, Washela, Hilda, and perhaps more people to do a little intentional ceremony with me for the launch of this podcast, which is happening very soon. So we're recording this a few days before I'm launching my podcast, as I'm very excited to do so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the request to you and everybody else. Thank you for that. I do want to touch on something. And you said with the rock people, stone people, all the experiences you had, I don't think that's imagination. I think there is a difference between imagination, also which I think it's more the label, because it's all creation, as you said. It's the label of imagination. It's coming out of my mind. I think it's coming out of the greater mind, and there's co-creation happening, and it's access to things that are very tangible, rather than just like a smaller idea or imagination. There's something that I've learned about recently, which is the difference between belief and faith. And belief, and as I had Mike Bledsoe on this podcast, he talked about belief is more of an imagination. It's, I think there is a God. I don't know. I'm outsourcing my spirituality to the minister or the rabbi. And I don't know. I mean, this guy's going to do the work for me. It's outsourced. And I think this is what's going on. I think there's a virus out there, and that's, people have mapped it out, and this is what it is. And I mean, I don't know tangibly, but they've done the work, and this is my belief. This is how it works. I really believe that that's the situation. And then there's faith, and faith is the connection to the divine, and faith and it comes from a deeper place in the heart. It comes from the heart rather than, I think, beliefs and imagination comes from the mind. And perhaps in the experience that you've had, yes, you see them from your mind, you see them from the third eye, but it's the way they feel. And I think the mind can be also wouldn't want to take or give credit to the heart or these other entities for their realness, and say like, oh, it's still kind of the egoic identity that has been there's no such things, this is my imagination. But then all the signs, and especially I think what Shayla said, when it comes in threes, that's when it's sealed for her, so when she was called to do 5-MeO DMT, which she described their two experiences on this podcast, which are mind-blowing, just absolutely crazy. She said, okay, so I'm just gonna ask. And the third sign was when a toad, she like closed her eyes, and a toad just like is in her balcony in her lanai, jumps in front of her, and it's like, okay, I guess I got to do it. I know for myself with 5-MeO, it's something that I have not done. There's a good amount of fear on my end of doing it, and I've done ayahuasca. It's not easy by any means. I'm called to do it in the future, but I'm also not asking for it right now. It's like, let's put this on the back burner. With asking the question, like, are these entities real? Like, show me. There's a silver coin right there. They come back. You open a book. There's the stone people. Washela, it's like, to me, it's as real as anything. Like, it can't be more real.
I mean, 100%. Like, I had 3 confirmations. Well, more than 3 confirmations now. And those experiences, like, I've meditated before, and I've like been initiated into a Buddhist mystery school to learn how to heal people and bless food. And like none of the things that I did with any of that stuff resonated and stuck out. Like I don't remember them necessarily. Where this resonated, it stuck out, and it was a different type of experience. So I agree. It's also happening in I still think it's happening in my imagination, but not that the imagination is not real. And I think that's kind of how I think about it now, is like what's going on in my imagination is a lot of stuff. And there's like my ego saying things. There's the reality, the information that the mass media wants to put into my head. And those are coming in and I can listen to them and they're real. They're being put out there. That's the mass energy. And then there's these little entities, these energies, like the rock people for me. And if anyone listening to this podcast knows anything about them, let me know, because like, it's not like I've studied this. It's just, they're like, you're going to be initiated and you're going to talk to people and learn about us. So help me like learn about them, because I'm supposed to teach. And like, it's happening in my imagination, but that doesn't mean it's not real. Like the things that are going on there, I think there's almost like a split between the things I create that I know are fake and the things that are coming in to my imagination that are real and they're being rendered by that first eye. So I 100% agree with you is what I'm getting to. And then I had read this book, and they were in Peru and talking to these shamans, and one of the Doña shamans that lived like by herself in the mountains, they were like talking about shamanism and imagination. And she's like, well, you know, what's the difference between, they're like, oh, this is all in your imagination. And she's like, what's the difference between imagination and reality? And she created something from her imagination that happened in the real world, like hours after that event that she said she would do. So she's like, let me show you how I can use my imagination to create something in the real world. So they're intimately connected. And I think we don't give credit to that. And I didn't up until this experience in 2020, when I started thinking like, oh my gosh, like how is this thing that happened, I thought in my imagination that wasn't real? It was real. And it manifested itself in like the physical world. So now I'm just like, whoa, this is crazy. I'm on this new path, and I didn't like study this stuff. Like I'm an engineer. So it's been a bizarre journey.
It's interesting, as you say, you didn't choose this, and it's kind of like you're being chosen to this, but you're surrendering now to the fact that it's a responsibility, rather than being like, just leave me alone. I'm gonna do me, or the egoic identity. What was the name of the shaman? You said the Donia. I want to take that note and put it in the links. What's the name?
I think I've got it behind me, but I think it was Doña Laura. And she's a story. She's real, but it's one of the stories that Alberto Villoldo in Shaman Sage Healer. It's in his book when he's in the Andes Mountains. And he's climbed up to the top of the mountain, and they met with this woman, and she lives all by herself. She's very reclusive. And they were talking about, she has this connection with birds. And someone didn't believe her. And so she's had this remark. And the guy that said he didn't believe her about controlling these condors, like came back to the camp hours later, and he was scratched all over his face and gouges down his back. And this condor tried to pick him up and take him off the mountain to eat him. And, you know, that she like manifested that to happen to him, and he didn't believe her. And after this experience, he's like, I'll do whatever you say. Like, I believe you, like, teach me.
Nice.
So that was from the Alberto Villoldo book. Who I noticed, like Alberto Villoldo, I don't know anything about him, or I didn't until I read this book. And his name, he's a shaman. He's from Cuba, and he came to the US, and he's a PhD in like anthropology or something. And he started going back and forth to South America, and then began training with shamans. And there's two shamans my wife works with who both trained with Alberto Villoldo. Never heard his name before, these two shamans. They just mentioned his name. And then the Bulletproof conference with Dave Asprey, Alberto Villoldo is speaking there. And I was like, oh, it's super weird that they're having a shaman at the Bulletproof conference. I wouldn't have expected that. So that's the third time I've heard his name. And somebody said to Heidi about me, you should read, this sounds like what Thaddeus is saying is exactly from Alberto's book, Illuminations. Like he's talking about this stuff from this book. So I bought the Illuminations book and I bought Shaman Sage Healer. And like I said, as I'm reading Shaman Sage Healer and I ask this question at night before bed, I read in that book about the rock people. Like there's some connection with Alberto Villoldo I'm supposed to learn something from. So again, something manifestation in reality confirmed 3 times. And now I'm going down the path of like reading some of his stuff and learning more.
Is Alberto talking in the next Bulletproof conference, the one in 2023, or he already did in previous ones?
2023. I think it's August 2023 is when he's speaking. June. No, it's June.
June 2023 in Orlando. That's coming up shortly here, pretty much around the same time that this podcast is coming. Are there any other books related to shamanism or anything else that you can share with the audience on learning? I mean, you said in 2020, I think, that you wanted to learn about spirituality, then you were gifted that time to learn. If you can share some of those books or any other books that you'd like to share.
So in 2020 and 2019, I started obtaining just books of like, someday I want to read these. They sound interesting. And I just picked them randomly. I don't know how I found some of them. Some I found at used bookstores and some I grabbed off the web. And they're on my bookshelf. I probably have 50. And I just started pulling books off and reading them like in no order. I'm just like, I'm going to read this. And I'm like, where did this even come from? Like, it's even hard to find if you try to look for it. I don't even know how I got it. So that book was called Light is a Living Spirit. It's by Amram Ivanov. He's a Christian mystic from Bulgaria. And both Light is a Living Spirit, he didn't write. He was a verbal oral teacher, and someone wrote his lectures down and published them as books. And he taught like somewhere around 1915 to 1970. Somewhere in that time period was his teaching, and then he lived till about 1989. So Light is a Living Spirit and The Yoga of Nutrition, those 2 books, I mean, I studied all this stuff about light from a scientific and a quantum physics standpoint. He opened up the mystical and shamanistic side of light and food. And my mind was like blown, like from these 2 books. They're super short. They're easy to read. I highly recommend anybody read those books. They're so good.
Can you share some of the highlights on the nutrition side of things?
So from Yoga of Nutrition, he doesn't talk a lot about yoga, but he talks about how to think about eating. And normally we think about, I'm going to get these calories or these vitamins and minerals from my food. So some people track calories for weight loss or muscle gain, and other people are like, I need to get enough nutrition. And they think of nutrition as the vitamins and minerals in the food. What he says is, in fact, we get more nutrition from the food for our subtle energy bodies. So like our etheric body, our emotional body, our energetic body. These are also parts of ourself that are usually ignored because we focus so much on the physical body. So he begins to explain to you that we have these other body systems that are energetic, and they get as much nutrition from the food as your physical body does, but only if you're paying attention. So when you eat, paying attention to the color, because different bodies are fed from the frequency and vibration of color itself. And if you're just consuming food really quickly and not paying attention, you're not feeding all these bodies. And then you can create dis-ease in the body, not live as long, have a more painful life potentially, he talks about. So you look at the color and you notice the color, and that feeds part of your energetic body. And then you notice the smell, the scents, those attract different, he calls like these different invisible beings or devas, divas, like these things of the spirit world. They're attracted by different scents. And so when you smell that, you feed some of those things and you attract some of those things to help you. Then you notice the subtle flavors. And as you're eating the food, you think about the love that nature, because we're eating natural foods, right? Not processed food, hopefully. So you think about the natural processes and the fairies and the spirits and the sun and all the information and energy that went into the food as you eat it. And, you know, you have this thought of like appreciating and enjoying and loving that food and everything that went into it. And that nourishes the subtle energy bodies so that they get as much energy as you obtain from the physical energy of the food. And as you begin growing those energetic bodies, his thought is that you can begin to ingest and consume pure sunlight, air, and then electrons from the earth without eating as much food. And you can eat more sparse meals, but get more energy and life and vitality from them. I just loved that concept. And I'm like, oh, it's not just that you can get to a point in your life where you can eat less, but have more energy, but you can train yourself to absorb those energies from less food and feed all the parts of yourself, the visible and the invisible.
Oh, it's amazing. I did not know that practice and concept, and that it makes a lot of sense. Mental body, emotional body, energetic body, and a lot of other bodies. It seems like the one that we see is actually the smallest one of all of them in size and in frequency. And it makes a lot of sense. Actually, Ra of Earth, whom I interviewed to Modern Caveman, he was a CrossFit phenomena, regional athlete and all that. Just amazing athlete. And what the path that he's on, he's a Kundalini teacher right now and a spiritual being. And he said that he didn't eat like almost anything for years, and he just went to the beach all day, and he got sunlight. And he did a lot of studying too, and he's still in phenomenal shape. And he really, did a lot of emotional work, spiritual work, mental work. So it makes a lot of sense to me. Getting information now from the field and from those other energetic sources of nourishment that are not only the food, and not to discount the food, they're in the food too. The food which is structure, water, and all that. But it's awesome. So I'm going to do that. I've been eating slow. I've been doing all kinds of different practices with the food and drinking before my meals, and eating from the most raw and juiciest food to the most cooked, and sparsing the meals, and doing some intermittent fasting, time restricted feeding, extended fasts, and feeling good in all of those. But I think that practice right there on the intentionality and the practice of the smell and color and all that, and taking all that information in, is going to make the next quantum leap in all of those bodies and in my expansion. So thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. I'm going to get that book as well.
Yeah, it's well worth reading that book.
Awesome. Are there any other resources that you recommend on those lines?
So, I will say, like, as I decided in 2019 to explore spirituality, I learned a lot from Washayla. We talk about Washayla a lot. You've had her on your podcast, and, washaylasananda.com, Washayla Sananda on YouTube. Like, I watched her videos. I did her activations. She created some special activations just for our retreats that we did on summer solstice out in the Boundary Waters in Minnesota. And some of them were just so powerful. So, I learned a lot from Washayla. I still learn from Washayla. Christoph Melchizedek, he was a guest on Washayla's Alchemy of Ascension season 2. And so was I. And so I was like, I'm going to watch the other guests. And I really resonated with Christoph Melchizedek. And so he actually has the Neo-Shamanic Society. And I'm like, I've never heard of that. And I follow Christoph, but I had never heard of his Neo-Shamanic Society. So I started looking up a bunch of stuff about that. And there's nothing. Like, there's no website. Well, there is a website. There's nothing on it. And there's no courses. There's no training. There's nothing. So he's got the same kind of idea around neo-shamanism. But he is of the Melchizedek lineage. So the Brotherhood of White, who's here to anchor light in the world. And I kind of resonate with some of his meditations and activations that he does. So I have been following him. His stuff, you've got to sign up for his newsletter, and he gives you a monthly Cosmo download on what's going on in the cosmos. And then I'll have like a monthly meditation and activation. So, and mostly he's on podcasts. He doesn't have a lot of stuff that's like easily accessible online, but those are the two other sources I used a lot besides Fortune de Saint Germain, who's an alchemist and a homeopath. And he's been on 5 podcasts on Crow 777 radio. And I have learned a ton just from listening to those podcasts with him.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. As for Melchizedek lineage, I did not know about their role in the world. All I know is what Melchizedek in Hebrew means. Malchi means the king of, and tzedek means justice. So it's the kings of justice. That's what the definition of the word means in Hebrew.
Okay, and most people know the biblical reference to God's highest priests is Melchizedek, um, and that's the only reference that I've heard in the Bible of Melchizedek as well. And most people are familiar with Drunvalo Melchizedek, who wrote two books. Well, he wrote more, but the two books people are familiar with are The Flower of Life and The Flower of Life Part 2. And those are also resources I started with in 2019. And it was like one of the first spiritual books I read, other than like, I mean, when I was 15, I read the Bhagavad Gita. I was in high school. My stepfather was a philosophy major. I took one of his books and I tried to read the Bhagavad Gita, and it was way too early. I couldn't understand any of it. I put it away. So this was the next spiritual book I really read, was The Flower of Life. And it was like, I'm like, what am I doing there? He's talking about like dolphins talking to people and like all this crazy stuff. And it was a wild ride, but it opened my eyes of like, there's a lot I don't know. There's a lot I don't know. So The Flower of Life would be helpful for some people to read as well. And it talks about the Merkaba meditation and creating your own vehicle of light. And I found those two books actually really helpful in the start of my journey.
It's beautiful. It's amazing. And I want to mention about Washela Sananda. So I'm enrolled in her ascension, in her embodied ascension training for the past couple of years. You can do it in a shorter amount of time than me, but I've been taking my time redoing a lot of her teachings, revisiting them as I keep peeling the layers of the onion. And she's been one of my greatest teachers ever. When I met her at your retreat in 2021, it was apparent to me that I have to work with her. And even though I didn't really have the finances for it, I figured they're just gonna have to come, because I felt so attracted to learning from her directly, and learning in an accelerated way with her. So you can still learn a lot from her on her YouTube and podcast, and definitely recommend starting there. If you feel called to do more, her embodied ascension training is absolutely a banger for expansion and a lot of enlightening experiences. So yeah, that's a huge one too. That's a lot of great stuff, Thaddeus. I'm really excited about your path, the path that you've been on, and already now initiating this new path, as you're saying, kind of the infancy of this path. I think that's going to be super exciting. I'm excited to be one of your partners in this expansion, and to keep doing the work that I'm doing to help the world ascend in that way, so you can keep ascending in your own way. And I'm excited for everybody who is listening to this podcast for all the resources that they can tap into right now, with a lot of books and other people to follow, to start or continue their journey into ascension and beyond. Yeah, with that, where can people find you, follow you?
So I'm creating the Neo-Shamanic Ascension YouTube, Facebook, and .com website. So all those will be coming very soon. In the short term, you can visit PrimalHacker on YouTube and PrimalHacker.com, where I'm still active today. And very soon we will transition to this Neo-Shamanic Ascension. And Washela Sananda will be joining us as a partner in that endeavor, because she is a trained shaman over the last 30 years, has the most experience. And I'm really looking for her help in my vision of training people, like actually taking people and teaching them how to become a Washela Sananda. How do you become a shaman, whether you want to be a galactic shaman, a rock shaman, whatever it is, like in your space, what do you actually do? How do you do it? Like, I want to teach the very basics all the way to becoming like a galactic shaman or whatever it is that calls to you. So with Shayla and my wife, Heidi, the three of us are working to put this whole thing together right now.
Amazing. And are there any upcoming retreats that you're hosting?
We do have a Florida retreat next year. It's already up for booking. So it's on primalhacker.com currently on the store. And it is called a Neo-Shamanic Initiation. And so we will actually put you through an initiation into neo-shamanism. You'll have an experience. And instead of a retreat where you sit back and let things happen, This is going to be a retreat where you learn the tools of the shaman, and we do ceremonies together, very similar to your retreats, so that you come away with information and tools to use for the rest of your life.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Amazing. I'm excited. I hope to be there myself in 2024. And I'm excited to see what other information and learn a lot more about neo-shamanism and everything else that you're being called to learn and teach. Thaddeus, thank you so much for this podcast and everything else that you've done so far and everything that you're going to do. There's a lot of gratitude in my heart, and I'm sure for the listeners that have made it so far, for the work that you're here to do as a spiritual being. So
thanks, Yoni. Thank you, everybody.
Big thank you, and aho, and now we'll see you on the next one.
Namaste.
Namaste. Well, lovely beings, I hope you enjoyed and were inspired by this conversation as much as I was. You can find the full show notes and all episodes on my website at yonihavana.com/podcast. If you are a man and you are called to do transformational work to become a better man, to find and grow the divinity within you, and you are longing a community of masculine men who share a passion for growth, please check out Men of Integrity by going to moi.community. Lastly, if you are enjoying the Yoni Havana podcast, I'd be so grateful if you take a moment to leave us a rating and a review on your podcast app of choice. The Yoni Havana podcast is a brand new show, and your support would help reach new people by rating higher on the algorithms. Also, your feedback would help me deliver the best experience to you as the show keeps evolving. Much love and a big aho. See you on the next one.